Okay, hello everyone. So today we're going to continue to look at server interaction. And then if you have time, we're going to learn Node.js. So let's begin. So last time we learned how to interact with a server using form tag to send data in an input form to server. But also we learned AJAX call. Basically AJAX call, you can send data and interact with the server without refreshing the page. So imagine that you can create like a one-page application where it's going to keep interacting with the server to load HTML elements and so forth. One important concept that we should have talked about is callback. So we're going to talk about callback today. So callback is basically a piece of executable code that is passed as an argument to other code, which is expected to call back the argument at some convenient time, which means in our case asynchronously. So this is one example. So let's say we have a API call, and then this API call is going to send ID string and password string, and then log in to a certain website. But then it can have two different callback where if password matches, and then it's going to run success function, which is basically calling this alert window. Failure is basically another callback function which is going to run this alert if password does not match. So typically callback function is something that that server requires, or or framework requires. So probably for us, like there are not many cases where we have to create a function that requires callback. It's not common as a front-end developer as of now, but like once we want to do something asynchronous with server interaction, we may want to create a function with some callbacks too. So basically this login function is promising that it's going to run this code when password matches, and then it kind of promised to run this failure function when it does not. So typically API documentation or server require to know what kind of callbacks are available. We gotta either read documentation of a server or API, or sometimes we may have to learn how server works. So this will make this whole procedure asynchronous, which means that the JavaScript is going to run this function, and then the JavaScript is going to run the following line immediately without waiting. And then when they know the password matches, and then that point it is going to run the success function or failure function. So in that way, this is asynchronous. So what if it was synchronous? Synchronous is something like this. Imagine that login function is not going to take callback, but instead it's going to let us know whether password matches or not by returning true or false. And then what we can do is possibly to evaluate this login return value, and then if it's true, it's going to run success, and then it's going to, if not, it's going to run failure. So this indicates it's synchronous, this means that this line cannot be run without getting results of this login function, right? And then imagine that this login function will include server interaction, and which may take a few hundred milliseconds or like few hundred milliseconds, or if the server is busy, it could take several seconds. If server is down, it's going to take forever, right? So that means that it's gonna, like, the program is gonna stop here and wait until it gets response, and then it means that user will not be able to use that website while waiting. So that's not a good user experience. So in that way, people want to use asynchronous. And then for asynchronous procedure, callback is something useful because it's going to run whatever function that I need to run. In this case, success function or failure function when it is available. So right now it's just alert, but it could be anything. It could be adding HTML elements to this page, or changing content on the website, and so forth. Okay, so and then we looked at event handler, and the event handler is kind of a callback function. So basically what it is saying is that, hey, I'm gonna run this particular function called foo when something is clicked. So it's not, basically it's not waiting until this button is clicked. It's going to run this call foo function when the button is clicked. So it exactly matches the definition of callback. So callback is a piece of executable code that is passed as argument. So this is the argument of this click function, which is expected to call back the argument at some convenient time. So some convenient time in this case is when this button is clicked. So yeah, again, event handler is a kind of callback function that is very specific to user input. So I wonder audio is being well recorded. Okay, cool. So this is one example that we saw last time. So this is JavaScript way to make an AJAX call. So let me draw one more time. So in this case, it's using XML HTTP request, which is basically sending a request to a server. And then we're using get method. This is the URL that it is requesting to. And then I think this was the flag for asynchronous. Like if it's true, it means it's asynchronous. And then this is the sending the request. But what's happening here is that it has a callback function, which is going to be executed whenever the state changes. So this is the callback function. So state will change from 0 to 1 and to 2 and to 3 and to 4. And 4 is when you get a response from the server. And then status 200 was okay response. I don't know if you remember this. And then once you get a response, you're going to change some like text of a certain element with data that you get from this text file. So this was JavaScript way, but we're not going to do JavaScript way. Given that we use jQuery, we learned jQuery, we're going to use jQuery way. So jQuery way is much easier. So there are 3 different ways to call AJAX call. So one is simply use $AJAX, and then this is taking one parameter, which is basically object. So this is, I guess this is the one object, which is URL, as one property. The second is success callback. What happens if like in a function, callback function that should run when it gets response. Again, the callback function in this case is this guy. So I like sometimes these kind of thing makes JavaScript code really difficult to read. But like it could have been just foo if this function was declared out externally. But like one important thing that you have to check is that every callback function, it has to follow how it's defined. Any kind of callback function is going to have some default argument that is going to pass. So you would have to know, typically you have to read the documentation to know what argument is being passed to this callback function. Okay, so that's Ajax call. Another one that is available here is using post method. So I don't know if you recall get and post, like the difference between get and post. Get is basically fetching data. Post is basically uploading data, but get can also send some data with it, but like the URL, it will be available as a query string, which is URL parameters. So post is more secure, and then it does not have size limitation of URL parameters. So again, this is the function. This is jQuery object, and this is member function of jQuery, and it takes parameters. One parameter is URL. So this is first parameter of post method, and this is second parameter, which is data that you're sending to the server. And then third parameter is callback function. So yeah, from this to here. Again, this could have been just function handle, and then you would have to have external declaration of function if you want to simply use function handle. Okay. Another example that we didn't see is a get method. Like get method is basically more or less the same with post. This is URL. This is callback function. But there could be data. So data is optional. So you can specify or you don't have to specify. So here I gave like an actual specification of the get function of jQuery. See, the only required parameter is URL. So specify the URL that you wish to request, and then rest of them are optional. So you can send data, callback function, which is callback function that to run if the request succeeds. And then data type, like meaning that what kind of data that you're sending, but typically you don't have to specify because like a jQuery will automatically detect its format. And typically we're going to use JSON. Okay, so here you can send anything. You can send, I don't know, like a variable, JavaScript variable, like string. It could be Boolean, it could be number, or it could be object or array even. Okay, so same kind of thing for post. So exactly the same. It's not a coincidence. Like those two function has exactly the same specification. Only the difference is that the difference coming from the difference of get and post. host is more secure and you don't have a size limitation for data. Okay, so one thing that we saw is that what if Ajax call fails? So here we said if the request succeed, but it may not succeed, right? There are a lot of different ways to fail, right? And it could be bad request, it could be not found, and then we looked at this interesting website. One was for dog. I found another website for cat, but basically, it's matching this. These are the status of request. So typically, if everything is fine, we'll get OK response. But we can get error, which is typically 400 for us, bad request, or it could be not found when the URL does not exist. When, like, for example, the server does not know how to deal with a certain URL. So for be able to deal with failure case, you can still use jQuery objects. So jQuery function, Ajax call functions, is going to return an object that has promise interface. So promise interface is basically JavaScript way to deal with asynchronous request, and it has some predefined member function. So predefined member function is one of, like, there are three useful one for us. Like done is when the request is succeeded. Fail is when it failed. Then is something that happens when these two, one or the other. So basically these are the function, and it takes callback function. So again, remember that this is like one way to make an Ajax call, and this is exactly same as calling this way. So again, remember that get function is going to return an object, and then that's like an object that has promise interface. We don't have to, like, I'm not going to go to the detail of promise, but basically it's like a basically what it says, like it's a promise that it's going to return something, and it has three member function that is useful for us, which is then, done, or fail. So this is success, this is failure, and this is both of them. So then function can take first parameter as a successful callback, or it could take second parameter, which is going to be failure callback. So these two are exactly the same, and these three are exactly the same. So because this is going to return promise object, and you can call then function and then specify callback for success case and failure case, and done is going to take successful callback only, and then done is also going to return the same object that was returned from this guy, and then you can use the fail member function to specify failure callback, and this is exactly the same as this guy. So when you do assignment 3, fail is going to be useful to get the data, like message coming from the server, so that, like, if something is wrong with the data, it's going to return some message, like error message from the server, and then fail is one way to print it out in the console. So that was ways to handle Ajax call failure. The other thing to note is that is JSON. So JSON is basically JavaScript object notation. So basically, when you send data from a client to a server, the data can only be text. Like there's like, you know, it cannot be object, it cannot be array, it can only be text, like string. So you have to somehow change, like, you know, so let's say you have an array, like 1, 2, 3, and this is kind of like an object, right? So you would have to translate this into some string, and JSON is the notation that the JavaScript uses to translate a JavaScript object into text. So translating something to text for this purpose of server interaction is called serialization. So JSON is a syntax for serialization of JavaScript objects for storing and exchanging data. Basically, it's a text written with JavaScript object notation, and it's essentially almost exactly the same as the ways we define JavaScript object. And I'll show you in a minute. We can convert any JavaScript object into JSON and send JSON to the server using this JSON.stringify. So this is existing object in any kind of JavaScript engine. And then this is, you can also convert any JSON string to JavaScript object using JSON.parse. So this is called deserialization because it's the opposite of serialization. So this way we can work with the data as JavaScript object with no complicated parsing and translation. So JS object is one thing that we use inside JavaScript code, and then we need to change it to JSON basically string or text. So changing JSON object to JSON string is called stringify. And then from JSON string to JSON object, you can do parse. So let me show you an example. So let me open a new tab and then create an inspector. And then open console. So let's create a object. So test is going to be, let's say, number. And then you can see type of test is number. But then you can, I think, you can stringify test, which is going to basically change number to string. So if I get type of this guy, it's going to be string. So it's pretty much like pretty simple, but let's do something more complicated. So I'm going to say, hey, my first name is Sang. This is basically a way for us to specify object in JavaScript, right? So last name is going to be Lee. And then I got this JavaScript object. So type of test is now object. But then I can stringify test is going to create a string that is going to translate this JavaScript object into string notation. So it does not revise string. Test is still test, like this is still object, but it's going to return string that serialize this JavaScript object. So type of this is going to be obviously string. So let me actually create a new variable. So serialized test is going to be this guy. And if we serialize, like, stringify JavaScript object into JSON notation, this is now ready for, data transmission. So when we send data from a server, from a web browser to a server, all the data should be text or string. And then if you want to store JavaScript object, one way to do is to stringify the JSON as a JSON object. The good thing is that like the whatever data that we specify here. So this is, for example, so this is basically one example that that send JavaScript object. The jQuery Ajax code is going to automatically translate this into JSON object. So server will receive the JSON notation of this guy. So what happened to the server? Like server should, sometimes you want to deserialize, like you want to get the actual value of JSON notation, like JSON notation object, string. So in that case, you can use parse. So let's go back. So again, serialized text is now a string, but I can deserialize it by test, like deserialized test is equal to JSON.parse, and then I can parse this string because it was written in JSON notation. And now this is going to create a new object based on this string. So basically it's almost the same, except the key is supposed to be read by this double quotation. But now this is something that has, all the function of objects, like, for example, like if you do type of this thing, it's gonna return object, and then deserialized text. You can use property, but this one you cannot do it because it's just string, like it does not know anything about its property. Okay, so that is JSON object. So, okay, so before we move on, assignment 4 is out. I would like to tell you that it's going to be very similar to assignment 3, except the fact that we're going to use server, Node.js server, so which means that it's going to fetch data from a server using Ajax code, and then server is going to take care of like a MongoDB storing. So you don't have to write anything for server, but I will provide you a server application. but you would have to write like Ajax code that's going to fetch data or update, make a request to update data in the model. So the one thing that I was going to do is to go over assignment 3 because assignment 4 is very relevant to assignment 3. And I think the key is posted. If you go here, files, assignment 3, now the index._key.js is the key file for assignment 3. And then I think it could be useful for you to compare your submission, with, but also it could be useful for assignment 4 as well. So I wanted to go over assignment 3, how I did assignment 3. So obviously it's not one way to do it. It's just like a lot of different ways to do it, but I'm going to go over the assignment 3 key. So let me actually open the index.html. Okay, is it working? Okay, it's working. Cool. So what did I do? So basically what I did is, let me actually collapse all the functions so you can see the some high-level structure. Okay, so this is the entire code. So I have two functions, like a helper function that's going to truncate string, because like if title is too long, I was supposed to truncate. This is basically take a data object as a parameter and then return the string of date. And then I have here, this is like a given object, like given data. And I have these two main functions, render HTML. So this is basically rendering, this returns HTML element string for one item. And then this is going to render whole table. So basically what I do is if document is ready, I'm going to render task, and this is going to call this function. And because we have 4 tasks, I think we have 4 tasks, right? In task, it's going to run this function 4 times. So let's look at the render task. So it's going to empty tBody first, and then create a for loop. And then there's some if statement that helps me skip some of the items that we don't have to render depending on the status, like state of task. Like if task is deleted, I don't have to render it. So I'm gonna go back, like skip this item and go back, go to the next one. If hide completed task is true, which is basically mapped to the button. Which button? This button. If that's true and then the task is completed, I don't have to render it, so I'm going to go back. If overdue only flag is clicked, and then if due date is either not specified, which means that it's not going to be overdue because it does not have due date, or if due date is greater than now, and then if it's completed, which means that we don't have to worry about it. So it's going to skip this item. And then this is just counting the number of completed tasks to know whether I should disable this button or not. But once it has, so it basically has 3 gatekeepers, whether to render this item or not. If it passes all these gatekeepers, it's going to call this render HTML function, and it's going to pass this one task, and then the render HTML is going to return string. So if you look at render HTML, basically it's going to take task and then render this long string, and then you can use this backslash to make multi-line string, and I use like basically concatenation to specify the value of that particular task, like, you know. So TR class is sometimes I would have to use active, sometimes I would have to use failure, depending on the state. So TL class, you can see that if task is completed, I'm gonna say, hey, TL class is gonna be success. Initially it was nothing, but I'm gonna add success. If it's overdue, it's gonna add danger, and so forth. And then here, if due date exists, like meaning that if due date is not null, I'm going to pass this, use this get formatted date. Otherwise, I'm going to use I'm going to have nothing. And then basically, this is long string, and it's going to return this string and then append it to this body. The other thing that I have to do once I append all the thing, because all the checkboxes is something that is newly generated, I want to add click like an event handler for these interactive behavior. So whenever checkbox changes, it's going to run this function. And then what this function does is basically changing the model, like the data, and then update the complete date depending on the status. And then I again use this value variable to keep track of whether I should disable the deleted, whether I should disable this button or not. And then once I update the model, like data, it's going to update run the render function again. And this is the part where I'm going to disable this particular button, the red button, when number of checked items is equal to 0, for example. If it's 0, it means that I'm going to disable this button. If it's greater than 0, it means that I'm going to enable this button. So disabled is equal to false. So greater than 0, equal to 0, and you cannot be less than 0. So I just have this function, else statement, just for the sake of sanity check. And this is another button, this like delete button, which is again newly generated because I just appended the HTML elements, so that I would have to make this event handler as part of this render function. So basically it's going to get ID from this value property, which is basically all the delete button. This is the delete button. It's going to have value. The value of body property is going to be its ID, or like index, and I'm going to use index to access the particular task in the task array. And then set deleted to true, and then you render it again, and then render task is going to skip the deleted the task with this gatekeeper, and so that it will not be rendered. Okay, so that was render task, and then you have some other event handler that you would have to add. So yeah, basically deleted completed task, and then you would have to update the task deleted equal to true per all the checkboxes that are checked. Like if this is checked, you're gonna access that particular task and then set the deleted property to true, and then render it again. Overdue, when you want to hide it, toggle class is pretty useful to turn on and off, add and remove class, and then again I have this global variable that keep track of overdue button status. So this is the button status, and I use it to render it, but also I just complement the value, because this is supposed to be Boolean variable, right? And then once I update it, I'm going to render it again. Similar thing for hide completed task. I toggle class and then complement this Boolean variable. Submit new task has, I would have to prevent default behavior because it has default behavior of refreshing the page. And I do sanity check of each input. Trim is basically a function that is going to trim all the white spaces in front or back at the end. But if it's 0, it means that nothing has been typed. So I give a user alert and then return. Same for due date. I check if it's parsable using date. I realized that this date.parse does not work well in Safari, but so in general, like when you make an app, like your own website, you would have to use something else. But like for the context of this class, I'm fine with only like working this. I mean, make this app only works in Chrome. So date parse works well for that purpose. So it's going to check the date and then create a new date. Also, it's going to get the value of text area value and then add one object. So this is basically one object and push it to the array. And there's some default value that you would have to set. Like in general, completed should be false, complete date should be null. You just specify created date, deleted is equal to false, and so forth. And then I use test.length to figure out the index. Last one is the opening the model window. So this is how I did the task, not task, assignment 3. And the assignment 4 is going to be exactly the same, but this time we're going to have server so that I wrote a very simple Node.js server, and then you would have to install Node.js and MongoDB and Express to be able to run the server like file that I wrote. And then your job is to create to write an index.js file for the HTML. So it's basically the same thing. Your job is going to run this index.js. And then server is, you don't have to worry about server, you don't have to worry about HTML file. Okay, so although I have some demonstration in the main video, I'm gonna briefly show you how it works. So this is the server that I'm running. And then I can get to the app using this localhost website URL. So basically it's the same thing, but the difference is that it's going to retain the data because the data is coming from server even after you refresh the page. So if I update this thing, check C lecture recording update, and then now I'm going to refresh the page, but it's still the same thing. The other cool thing is that because it's using the server, like it should synchronize the state between multiple applications. So here we have refresh button, and then I have this update button. So update button is basically same thing as, almost same as adding a new task. So I'm going to add a new task. And also update it. So like before I update, if I refresh the page, like I can refresh in two different ways. I can basically refresh the page using the web browser refresh button, and I get this new data because it's fetching the data from the server, and then you can see all the server interaction. But if I change something, updated the title, update. Now these two are different, but if I press this refresh button, it's going to update the page depending on the data that it got from the server. So yeah, that's basically it. So the only two differences that is refresh button and update button. But other than that, it should work exactly the same. And then I think I wonder if I can show you the probably not. Okay. Okay, never mind. So basically, what is given is this index.js, which is almost empty. But I will provide some structure this time. This is very similar to the structure that I used in assignment 3. Again, you don't have to follow this structure, but I recommend you to follow the structure. No matter how you did it, like it could be very similar to what you have done. So if that's the case, you can feel free to revise your own file, but this is something that I would recommend. So I left all the functions. Now you're going to have a new function called fetch data, which is going to make Ajax call. You have more event handler to update task and so forth. So and then refresh the page and so forth. Okay, so that is that. So let's come back. And this is due April 9th, which is Thursday. So you have some time. You have what, about 10 days, I guess. But start early. Because if you normally with like commands, like installing new apps like Node.js, MongoDB, that's going to take some time. It may not be obvious, so I would recommend you to start early. Okay, so let's move on to the backend programming. And I'm not going to cover too many stuff about backend programming because this course is about front-end programming. By the way, like the starter code for assignment 4 is going to be available here. So I provided index.js, server.js, index.html, and then I'm going to post this document in the assignment. I haven't done it yet at the time of recording, but I will fairly soon. And you'll be able to find a way to install Node.js and so forth. Okay. I'm gonna add the link. So let me actually briefly talk about this backend program, backend technology. So we're going to use the server-side programming, not programming language. It's more of a framework or runtime environment, they call. So Node.js is a server-side JavaScript runtime environment. It's again, programmer needs need to use JavaScript to run to write a program in Node.js. It's designed to be scalable and optimized for a high concurrent environment. It's a command line tool like Python, but it also runs files. Like this is the this is running Node.js file. So if I exit, by the way, quitting the server Node file, you need to press Control C. So if I do a node, it's basically kind of like a command line, kind of like a console. I can create whatever thing that I want. Let test is equal to hello. And then also there's going to be console. Quit or exit. Okay. That exit. Okay. So that's Node, but like you can run a file. So here I'm running a particular web server using Node.js. So like Node.js engine is like half of it is written in C++, so it's supposed to be very fast, but also it has some JavaScript portion too. It is supposed to be easy because we are using one language for both client and server, like it's just JavaScript. We don't have to run a separate language. It is event-driven, asynchronous IO model, so it's non-blocking by nature, so it's going to use callback function very heavily. It takes care of all the packages like that it requires. So it's a I don't know if this is a cool thing or not, but Node.js, like anybody can create a package, kind of like a library, and then make it as part of their package manager. So I'm going to talk about NPM, which is basically stands for Node.js package manager. So package is kind of like a library, but like when let's say someone developed the library and then post it to NPM website, and then we can install that particular package from the cloud. And the good thing is that it will install other dependent packages automatically, but depending on the dependency that is specified. So I happen to have one package too, library. So this is where you post, if you create your own package, you can post it to NPM website. And then this is how you install it in the command line. And then you can see our live routing is dependent on two other packages, two other packages. Well, one of them is jQuery, jQuery-Y, and so forth. Nobody downloaded. Okay. Some people downloaded. Okay. Anyway, and you can see where the repository is and so forth. So again, so this is, I don't know, good thing because, like, you know, let's say you want to use Bootstrap, but then Bootstrap requires jQuery, and then in assignment 3, you have to include both of them, right? And then you would have to figure out, okay, Bootstrap requires jQuery, so I would have to include jQuery first, and then add Bootstrap. But here, you are specifying these dependent, like you don't have to specify, you don't have to know this kind of dependency. Once you declare that, hey, I'm going to use these packages, use this package, all the packages that are required will be automatically installed in node_modules folder. And it's useful when you don't, I mean, like imagine that you create a package, like one library, and then you don't want other people to know what kind of package that it requires. And then like simplify how to install that package. You can simply specify the dependency in package.json file. And then that's going to be installed. Like if your client or the user of the library, if they run npm install, it's going to like, you know, like install all the packages that it requires. So there are a lot of, you know, memes about npm, because this could be seen as a strength, but this could be seen as, like, you know, like weakness of Node.js, because, you know, you don't know what you're installing. So like this is kind of a metaphor of, hey, this is the package that I want, but like it comes with all the packages that are dependent on, even though I didn't order that particular thing. And there are many other interesting memes. Sometimes it takes forever to install all the packages, and then node modules, so you don't really know what's inside and so forth. Okay, so that was Node.js. So Express is one package, like it's a package that that is, you know, kind of like a library for web application framework, and it provides a robust set of features and existing function for web application. And for us, it is useful that because it takes care of routing. So routing is basically the mechanism by which requests are connected to some code. So, you know, imagine I would have to send, like, make a request to fetch data, like let's say www.app.com fetch data, and then it does not, you see that it does not have any file extension .com or update data. So imagine that, hey, you want to run different function for this URL and the other URL. How do we route each request into right places? And then Express is going to take care of this routing. So it's like, you know, it's kind of like a similar bit to the relationship between JavaScript and jQuery. So Express is just like a convenient way to take care of like a request coming from clients. And you can technically create Node.js only web app, but, like, you know, there's no reason for us to go a harder way. And then Express is pretty common, and it's more of like a norm these days. So the last element that we need for the assignment is MongoDB. So it's basically database, a document-oriented NoSQL database. So I guess I don't want to go detail about what it means by NoSQL, but basically it's like, kind of like a new technology compared to relational database, which is great, but then it has some limitation in terms of scalability. So, some probably folks from Google come up with this technology. Maybe not Google, but like this is kind of like a new database technology. So it's hash-based, schemaless database. So schemaless meaning that you don't have to specify which fields will exist. So there's no data definition language. In practice, this means that you can store hashes with any keys and values that you choose. So the other good thing about this is that it's going to use JSON notation. So I don't know how to read it, but basically maybe BSON, I don't know. But basically it's a binary JSON, and then it's something that that we can read easily because it's used, it looks like a JavaScript object. It's going to have underscore ID, which is like, automatically generated for each document. Yeah, so this is something that we're going to use for our assignment 4. Okay. So some of you may know MySQL, some of you may not, but let me define some terms. So but hopefully everyone knows Excel. So Excel, you have multiple files, like, this one icon. There could be Excel, well, let's say there are 3 files, and you can say each file is for DB in MongoDB, which is same as MySQL. So database is kind of like a one Excel file, and there could be multiple databases. So like as if we can have multiple Excel file. And remember, like one Excel file can have multiple spreadsheet, right? The bottom, like, if you open Excel, on the bottom, like you have a tab for a spreadsheet, and if you click it, it's going to open that particular table, particular, grid. So this is like a multiple spreadsheet, but it is in MySQL, this is called table. In MongoDB, it's called collection. And then once you go into one sheet, Excel, you're going to have one row, which is going to have one data entry. So let's say this is first name, this is last name, this is occupation, this is email. If this is the format, this is one represent one person, right? So this is Sang, Lee, and so forth. So this is row, and the number of row represent number of people in this table. So in MySQL, it's called table, and then again, MongoDB is called collection. But row is basically the same as record in MySQL, but it is called document in MongoDB because, in MongoDB you can have complex objects. And then you have each column. It's called typically fields, or like in MongoDB, it could be called as fields, or it could be key value pair like we see in the JavaScript object. And you have cell in Excel, this is value, and then again, it's the same as value. And then you have row number, like I don't know if you remember, but like in Excel, you have this row number on the leftmost side. So this is kind of like an index in MySQL or key. And this is underscore ID in MongoDB. So this is kind of like a, to give you some concept of the database. This is a common thing for any kind of database, but specifically MongoDB use different terms. So I wanted to give you some, each terms, explain each term, because you may have to read the server.js file. Okay, so that is that. And then we have this stack, like when you might have heard something like mean stack, lamp stack, and so forth. But basically, stack is basically kind of like a combination of technology that is useful to build a web application. And like typically, we looked at these three different things, right? Node.js, and Express, and MongoDB. And that's typically three components of one stack. Typically we want platform, web server, database, and front end. And LAMP is Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. WIMP is Microsoft stack, Windows. I don't know what this was. I think it was internet server or something. Integrated internet server, possibly. And then they have their own database called MS-SQL. And then they used to have a front-end technology called ASP. And then we just looked at these three different things, right? So we looked at MongoDB, Express, and Node.js. And this is pretty modern stack that people used to choose, people choose these days. And then the only thing that we haven't looked at is this front-end technology. Some people use Angular, some people use React, some people use Vue.js. Depending on what they use, it's called Mean, Marn, or Maven. So you can, and then probably we're gonna touch upon React a little bit towards the end of the semester. But right now, we're not using any of the few front-end technology. We're just using pure JavaScript and jQuery, which is completely fine. I don't know which one is the best. Okay, so I think because I've been always going over time, today I'm gonna stop at the right moment. It's exactly 75 minutes, maybe 2 minutes before the 75 minutes. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to record one more lecture, which is basically going to, I'm going to show you how to install these Node.js, Express, and MongoDB, and then create a simple server-side application that that's going to respond to AJAX request. Okay, so I think that's it for today. But another lecture recording that I'm going to record and post, I'm going to post it whenever it's available. But it is supposed to be a lecture recording for Thursday, and then feel free to watch it on Thursday. But if you want to, if you have some trouble doing the homework, I recommend you to watch the video that I'm going to post for Thursday. Okay, so thank you everyone. And I am not sure about the quiz yet, but if I post any quiz, I will announce it using Canvas announcement. All right, thank you.